Hello and welcome to Haverfordwest Priory. You're joining me today on a short sort of history tour, um, going into a little bit of detail about what this place is, a little bit of its past. So I hope you enjoy. So what you're looking at are substantial remains of a 13th century cruciform church, together with cloisters and claustral ranges which were redeveloped in the 15th century. Along with a tower dating to that later period, the largely intact remains of the medieval priory garden were discovered through excavation. Now, the priory appears very little in the historical record, as it's managed to avoid all major upheavals and being spared from such fires or attacks which brought attention to it, um, as it had to other similar institutions. So, Haverfordwest Priory was founded in around about 1200. The land on which the priory stands was donated by Robert Fitz-Tancred. He was the grandson of Tancred, considered by many to have been the original Flemish builder of Haverfordwest Castle. Now, a little bit of a tidbit. Haverfordwest initially was built in and around the castle. It was initially a really small settlement, and the original name for the town was Castleton. There is one street within Haverfordwest which sort of reflects that little bit of past, and that's called Castleton Grove. In the time-honoured tradition of wealthy men of power needing to secure their entry into the afterlife, the granting of land for the building of a priory might have seemed the most favourable thing to do. But Robert wasn't as generous as you might think. See, that land had actually very little use for him. It's at the closest point to the river. It at that time was basically an unusable marsh, and slightly away from the river it rose extremely steeply. Nevertheless, monks are highly unlikely to reject any offering, and as such the Augustinian Priory of St Mary and St Thomas had begun. So the awkward task of creating a flat site on which to build was achieved by cutting away at the steep bank and depositing the excavated material into and on top of the marshy area. What this did, in effect, was give a really, really poor foundation. So the structures are always slowly subsiding. In addition to this, the steep bank that remained, giving way to the consistently higher ground behind it, ensured that rainwater continually drained and still does into and around the priory. There were some positives. Being so close to the river at that point was basically like a motorway yesterday, lots of trade, allowed extremely easy access. Now combine this with the proximity of one of the most successful and prosperous towns in Wales, guaranteed that the priory was going to be a success. That was until the dissolution of the monasteries by Henry VIII, the effects of which arrived in Pembrokeshire in 1539, heralding the end of and then the destruction of the priory. Now, the prior leading up to the dissolution, and who subsequently became Bishop of St David's, was William Barlow. He was a leading figure in assisting Henry to successfully divorce Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn. As a reward for his efforts, Barlow was given the position of prior by Anne, who had, to bolster her standing prior to marrying Henry, been made Marquess of Pembroke. Having that title, you also had the lordship of Haverfordwest and the power to gift the position of prior. Now, sadly, following the dissolution of the monasteries in 1536, the site passed into private ownership, including that of Sir John Perrott, who furthered the ruination of the buildings. Basically, he was using stone from the priory structures to repair his home at Harrowston. Harrowston being Harrowston House. I will do a video on that at a separate time. Following this, the site remained largely unused and neglected until around about 1982, when the Guild of Freemen of Haverfordwest gave it into state care. This then followed an 11-year period of extensive excavation and conservation works, with the final result being what you can see today. It's also worth pointing out that the original herb garden is the only surviving garden in this country, and it's been renovated and planted with examples of plants used at that time. So to look at today, there's not much to look at, in all honesty. They are substantial remains. It's tucked away as well. Now, you'll see, obviously, the road bridge, the cars going past up at the top of the screen there. Well, when you're on that bridge, when you're passing, you don't really tend to notice this. And likewise, to the left of where we're looking at now, you have the hill, the steep hill, called Union Hill. You go on up that, that's another arterial route really, and you go up that and you don't notice this. The only way you know this is here is by really paying attention. Now what I will say, sadly, is that being so close to the town centre, with the town centre effectively being basically to the left of us, being so close to the town centre and all the pubs and clubs does mean on a Friday, Saturday night sort of thing, you get a lot of drunk people coming into here, leaving mess all over the place. You do get a lot of drug users in here as well. It's not a place I would recommend going at night time, purely for that reason. Now, compared to, say, Haverfordwest Castle, this ruin is actually very, very well kept. You look at Haverfordwest Castle on the other hand, and it's dilapidated. There's rubbish strewn all over the place. It's basically forgotten about, if you want. Whereas this is actively taken care of, which is nice to see. Now, with the river being so close, mentioned previously about flooding, so the bit we're at now doesn't generally tend to flood. What tends to happen as we start walking down towards, well, down this little slope, as if I turn the camera, that is, there we are. So in front of us now is where it floods, and that's on a really high tide, like a 7, 8, 7, 9, and it all floods. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed that, and yeah, wait for the next one.